Murder of Castle Nathria has had yet another patch, and I believe I can tell you guys the best 5 decks to be playing now that the hero cards Guff and Magister have been nerfed a little bit. Let's go ahead and get this started because the first deck on my list is going to be Meaty's rank 1 control Shaman. Not very shocking to see Meaty get rank 1 legend with a deck, but it's always worth noting to see what he's able to take to top legend and actually work with, because it seems like the only deck that this really had a weakness to was Boar Priest. It feels like it has a very fair match against everything that you're going to be seeing in the meta. But the real question is, what are we seeing right now? And we'll get to that question here in a minute when I show you guys what the other decks that are very popular at top legend are. But to be honest, I think one thing that's very important to note is that when I was playing this deck, I didn't really have, like, the best win rate. Granted, Meaty apparently went 69% with this deck. I don't know if this was all the games played post-patch. I feel like that number's a little high, granted how quick he posted this screenshot. And he was already playing a lot of Control Shaman before the nerfs anyway. Maybe that kind of solidifies how good this deck is regardless. But I do want to point out the fact that my friend was actually playing this deck, and he did somewhat well with it. Let me go ahead and find the stats for you. But my friend was able to go 19-7 with this deck around, I think, the golden ranks. We're going to go ahead and check it here. But if we just take a look at his stats, yeah, he was able to take it from the silver ranks to the gold ranks and finish up in platinum with a 19-7 record. So if you're looking for a deck that'll be good at the lower ranks, I definitely believe that this deck is one way to go about it. This is going to be the next video that I make a deck spotlight on, because I've played this deck a little bit, but I feel like I need a little bit more games under my belt in order to start recommending how to play this deck entirely. But Meaty does suggest keeping Schooling, keeping Clownfish, Sleepbreaker, Bolner Hammerbeak. Not too sure about that, but if you play it on turn 2, it can literally win games. Caverns, obviously a really good keep. You keep Location, and you can keep Null on coin. So this deck is really, it's not even about the mulligan. The most important thing about this deck is being able to know which win cons to go for and when to tempo and when to go for card draw. I think more than not, you want to try and tempo as consistently as possible, because this is a quote-unquote mid-range deck, not just a control deck. It's a mid-range deck in the sense to where you have to build up a board and then over the course of the game have something stick in order to deal a bunch of damage, because you really don't have too much direct damage outside of, like, you know, Berkana the Elements and maybe finding something out of School Teacher. Obviously, you do have Sire Denathrius, but it needs to be in hand in order for you to have the burst, so we already know what that is all about. But overall, I do think that Control Shaman has a lot going for it in this particular meta, especially considering that Muck Pools into Goldshire No Evolves on turn 2, turn 3 are still possible, and this is like the best deck that can utilize this particular combo, so I think that's one scam that you can always utilize. Wildpaw Caverns obviously scams decks like Demon Hunter and Weapon Rogues and whatnot, and honestly, Rogue and Druid we'll talk about here at the end of the video to see if the nerfs were impactful, because I'll go ahead and spoil it for you guys. Druid and Rogue are not on my top 5, even though I do believe they may wiggle their way back into the top of the meta. It's just about seeing what we get surrounding the meta and to see if these decks actually have a chance, because especially with the next deck that we're going to go over, it really just needed a chance to survive in the meta, and now it's one of the best decks that we have available. And a lot of you may not be surprised, but the next deck that we're going to go over is Relic Demon Hunter. This deck is absolutely taking the meta by storm, especially a top 100 legend, and I feel like it's a combination of people playing it because 1, it's fun, 2, it's actually good right now. I think this is pretty much the same list that I featured in my rank 1 Relic Demon Hunter video, and I think the only card difference is the fact that we took out the nerfed Kael'thas for an Alexstrasza Lifebinder, which honestly makes a lot of sense since you run cards like Bran, and you already have Sire Denathrius, so if you have like this insane pop-off of being able to play Bran, Alexstrasza, into Sire Denathrius because of how Relic of Dimensions can be nutty with its discounts, I don't even see this thing being that uncommon in all honesty. A very common way to win the game was to try and set up Bran and Zymox for the biggest board possible, especially against decks like Druid that can't deal with it. So I think that this deck has a lot of potential in order to do very well, and McBanterface was able to climb to rank 14 with this version of the deck. Obviously, Pheno is the one that made it, but I don't know if Pheno is currently having as much success as some of the other players. Maybe this is a discrepancy on different servers, different metas, that kind of thing. But at least on the NA server, McBanterface was able to reach rank rank 14 legend with this particular deck. And it's very, very close to what we've seen Relic Demon Hunter do already. So if you're familiar with the archetype, now is your chance to take it to top legend, because this deck has a surprising amount of ways that it can win. And honestly, I feel like this has one of the biggest skill caps in this meta, because decisions are extremely important with this deck. And that's one thing I love about a lot of the decks that we're featuring in this list right now. A lot of them do require you to think about your turns and try to plan them out accordingly to get the most amount of value. And it's not just about, you know, curving the 1, curving the 2, curving the 3, that kind of thing. But Relic Demon Hunter, if you've been waiting for a time to play this deck, the time for waiting is over. It's time to start playing this deck, and it's time to hit legend with Demon Hunter, because we all know that Demon Hunter, Warrior, and Paladin have had it pretty rough this expansion. The next deck that I'm going to highlight is something I don't actually believe is a top 5 best decks, but somebody on Twitter was able to reach rank 43 legend with this particular deck, and I don't know if this is just a bait tweet to where he won with 1 game and then decided to post a screenshot. I'm guilty of doing that because it's funny to do so, but I always tell you guys if it's actually bait or not. I can go ahead and safely say that this deck is pretty much bait, as long as you don't find Theatar on the ladder. Like, Theatar is the only reason why this deck cannot perform well. Because unlike Boar Priest, or unlike other decks to where, you know, losing 1 card isn't too bad, you have several 1 cards that you don't want to lose with this deck. So in case you guys don't see what the combo is with this deck, the whole point is to play the quest and to use the first 2 parts of the quest line in order to reduce the cards that you draw, thanks to cards like Abyssal Depths, Need for Greed, and just straight up just trading cards. But the whole point of this deck is to eventually play Abyssal Depths to hit your Abusive Sergeants and your Lady Setheno. I think I highlighted this deck once, but just in case anybody hasn't seen this, you have an insane potential of being able to essentially have 6 damage on top of every single spell that you play. And, well, I've had pretty nutty games with this deck, to say the least, to where I've had a turn 5 lethal with this deck. I thought I missed lethal and then ended up getting exact lethal because of misordering these cards, because one thing you definitely want to do is to play Dispose of Evidence last. I already have made this mistake and almost threw a game with it, but luckily I'm just so good that even my accidents are still really, really powerful. But in any case, this deck is very all in. If you don't win by like turn 6, turn 7, it's very hard to set up the win, because the more enemies or the more minions that your opponent has, the more likely this deck is just not going to perform very well. So with that in mind, I think that if you want a fun deck to try and climb with this season, this can be one of them. I don't have absolute faith in it, because I think I went like 3-5 with this deck. But again, I'm playing at top 1000 legend. I'm going against people that absolutely want to win and want to get that rank 1 screenshot to post on Twitter. And unfortunately, this is not the deck that you're going to hit rank 1 legend with, but you might be able to catch some people off guard and have some fun with Lady Setheno. And I think that's worth it at the end of the day, because combo decks are really not doing too well right now. And this is like the closest thing that we have to a consistent combo deck that isn't just playing Boar Priest. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I talk a lot about Boar Priest? Because guess what? Boar Priest actually is one of the best decks in the meta right now. And I'm not even like trying to bait you guys with this. I legitimately think that if you can play this deck 100% effectively, Theatar isn't even a problem. There are so many pro players that are saying that Theatar is not a problem for this deck, because by the time that Theatar ends up getting played, the best card that they can take is Wild Pyro. And why am I saying Wild Pyro when obviously they could take Amulet of the Undying or an Elwyn Boar? The thing about this deck is that you never leave the opportunity for Theatar to take your Boar or to take your Amulet of the Undying. The only way this can really happen is if you trade Amulet and then draw the other Amulet when you have no mana left, which unfortunately those kind of situations can happen. But there are going to be a lot of situations to where you're literally just going to play the Boar when you have the mana, and you're just going to trade the Amulet so you never have to worry about Theatar. Yeah, it'll suck if Handmaiden or Pyro or like Switcheroo or some big card gets taken, but you still have ways of doing insane amounts of card draw with like Northshire Cleric, Gift of Naru, and Pyromancer combos. If your Pyromancer does get taken, you can still use the second Pyro for the draw combo and then save your Devours for the actual Boar combo to get the sword. There's just so many ways of being able to play this deck to where only 1 card has changed since the previous version of the deck, and that is the Light It Burns. It took over the spot of Holy Smite, which honestly makes a lot of sense in this deck, because it used to be that Holy Smite was just a card you could throw out of hand, or you could kill a Boar with it. Now, with the Light It Burns, it absolutely gives you a way of being able to clear a big minion, like a 10-10 or something like that. That was something that this deck was kind of missing, because, you know, all you had was like Zorella in order to be able to deal with that, or maybe a gigantic Pyro play, but dealing with the 10-10 is very difficult with this deck. Now that we have the Light It Burns, Not so much difficult. But in all honesty, I do believe that this deck has a very real chance at being one of the best decks right now for Priest. And honestly, I wanted to include Boon Priest as well. But I think this deck is starting to fall out of favor, especially since Boar Priest is becoming the norm. And Rogues are dwindling, because this deck was really good against Rogue, not good against everything else. So Boon Priest is probably not the way to go. However, if you don't like Boar Priest, Naga Priest will work just fine. However, I don't see anybody ever playing this deck. This is like the third time that I have put Naga Priest on like top 10, top 5 best decks to be playing in the meta. And I maybe see like 2 players playing this deck because no one wants to play this style of deck. It's just so boring. It's so boring and it's so dependent on Wig being drawn that it doesn't even matter what happens with this deck if you don't get Wig. Like, you have to hit the Wig, you have to hit Thrive to get the Wig, and if you don't have the Nagas in order to start getting the value out of this card, this is just, this is literally one of the most unfun decks that you can play that actually can win right now. And it just blows my mind that Naga Priest has been a top contender for essentially since Voyage of the Sunken City, because I remember this deck being somewhat popular during a GM during those times. But oh my god, no one wants to play this deck. Like, let me know in the comments below if you are a Naga Priest player and you are having the time of your life, because this meta has been so good for Naga Priest just in general. And now the deck is on top yet again to where I'm literally seeing it all over on HS Replay. I don't like using HS Replay as like the go-to, this is what the meta is and anybody who disagrees with me is wrong. But 3 different servers have this as a tier 1 deck. You can't ignore that after 48 hours of data to kind of give us a direction of where this meta is going. But if you really don't like Naga Priest, and if you really don't like Boar Priest, you can just play Quest Priest. Do I have a deck for you? No, because I don't like Quest Priest, and I think the deck is absolutely meh. But I will go ahead and leave a code down below in case anybody wants to just go ahead and copy it. But just know that this is kind of a Priest metagame depending on how things change. It's just a matter of which deck is going to perform the best. If you want my honest opinion, I think it's Boar Priest. I think it's Boar Priest. It's just the best deck out there right now. And if you learn how to play this deck effectively, you will quickly realize how many free games are available when you play this deck. The next deck that I'm going to show you guys is one that I don't really need to talk about all too much. It's Face Hunter. Do I really have to tell you how to play Face Hunter? You play the 1-drop, you play the 2-drop, you play the 3-drop, and then suddenly you've already won when you set up Terra Coil into eventually collateral damage. I don't know. This deck just freaking works, man. And I think that the only thing that was really stopping Face Hunter was how quickly Rogue could beat it and how easily Druid could just make them irrelevant. Hunter was one of those classes that was performing really well at the lower ranks, but once you hit like the Diamond 5, it fell off. It went from being like one of the most popular, most consistent decks that you would see to being absolutely unplayable because of how good Rogue, how good Priest, and how good Druid were in the previous patch. But now Hunter has actually a way of being able to win games since it has enough time to do its thing by turn 6 and not just lose to Rogue by turn 4, turn 5 more times than not. So you can play this deck if you just want an easy ladder climb. I never like Face Hunter, but I will tell you guys what the good decks are. Just like Beast Hunter, a deck that I don't believe has any new cards in it and it's not changed at all since the previous version, is also a deck that people are winning with again. Maybe you don't run Devouring Swarm and maybe you run double Ramming Mount, but I'm not 100% confident on that change. I don't play a lot of Hunter, so just take that suggestion with a grain of salt. But I don't necessarily like the idea of running Devouring Swarm in this deck since you automatically you have the board and you just don't let up, man. If you have your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, potentially 6, 7 curve, which is insane to say with this deck, but oh my god, the amount of times it curves me is ridiculous. It just automatically wins the game a lot of the time. I'm happy that King Crush finally sees play in a deck, and this was a deck we've already seen, so this isn't too shocking to me. But I hate playing against this deck. I don't know about you guys, but I personally just don't like what Hunter's devolved into over these past couple expansions. And this is like the only like deck that isn't Face Hunter that should be getting my attention, but I digress. I just don't like this deck overall. And the fact that it has no new cards in it is kind of whack in my opinion. But yeah, no new cards from this expansion. Still performing well, both on HS Replay and in my experiences playing up against this deck, because Harpoon Gun into Hydrolodon is still a really good thing. Turn 4 scams are coming back, it seems. Because, like, you have Boon Priest, and you have this deck, which have, like, ways of being able to cheat the game on turn 4. But I feel like if you're not doing something massive by turn 4, turn 5, your deck is not very good right now. So this deck just happens to work, and I hate to report on it, but, you know, I gotta give credit where credit is due. And when Hunter does well, you know, if I'm admitting that Hunter is good, it's probably time to play Hunter because I never want this class to be relevant in the meta. Previous patch was heaven for me, but Hunters are coming back. Better get used to it. Next up is actually a Control Warrior deck. Can you believe that Control Warrior is actually playable right now? Well, guess what? It's not. It's Charge Warrior because that's the only way that that Warrior can even exist right now is potentially having, like, you know, this scam that your opponent can't predict. However, this is a deck that Man of Cheese was able to reach rank 84, I think. Like, he was able to reach top 100 legend with this deck. He only ended up playing this game he only played this deck 9 times, but he went 8-1 with it in top 100, I think on the EU server, which is a pretty big deal in my opinion. But according to his stats, he was able to beat Demon Hunters, he was able to beat a Priest, a Rogue, a Shaman, a Warlock, a Warrior, and only lost to Mage, apparently. But the thing I really don't know about this deck is the inclusion of the Queen. Why is this card in the deck? And when I was playing this deck yesterday, people were telling me it's so that way you can make another to the front. But I've got a better question. Why don't we just run a card that discounts these cards for us? Like, we've already got a Finley in the deck. Oh, wait a minute. Is Finley not in the deck? Oh, Finley's not in the deck. Okay, Finley must be in the other deck that somebody else sent me. Because this was like a big question that I had on stream the other day, was why do we play Queen when we have Finley in the deck? So this actually, the list that I was playing was looking like this, actually. Yeah, it was one less Forge in the Flame for a Finley. But I don't really know how much I like the idea of running Queen and Finley when you're not even running from the depths. So what I did, instead of playing this particular deck, I decided to try out this deck the other day. And I don't know, I like From the Depths more. There might be times that this card is quote-unquote dead, or there might be times where you, with Queen, you have to, like, go for, like, a Horn target and maybe get, like, a Gigafin or, like, maybe, you know, I don't know, a random freaking Colossus to maybe turn the game for you. But overall, the reason why I still like From the Depths, even though it's 4 mana, and it seems awful to see this card at 4 mana, is because all you need to do is just hit, like, one combo card, and then suddenly, like, the To the Fronts combo is significantly easier. Maybe this is Cheeseman's way of being able to add a layer of consistency to this deck to where you just have to draw as frequently as possible. But I don't know. I really like the idea of running the deck like this, because he doesn't even run Grom in his original list, which is something I don't agree with either, because if Captain Galvangar gets taken by the Theatar, suddenly you have one less card to be able to win the game. However, I really don't know how good Charge Warrior is, but one thing I definitely need to show you guys, and again, I'm not somebody that uses HS Replay as, like, the law of the land, but on the China server in the past day, or in the past patch, actually. Let me see which server this was. Maybe it was on the Asia server. There was one server in particular to where Charge Warrior was absolutely dominant. And it turns out that server was the NA server. So I don't know, maybe Charge Warrior can kind of work out. Oh, this isn't really working very well. Let me move it over for you. But boom, there's Charge Warrior sitting at tier 2 on the America server. I'm kind of working kind of improving as I go through this, because I don't know a better way of being able to display this. But yeah, here you go, man. Here's the data that Charge Warrior apparently in top 100 legend, or top 1000 legend the past day has been doing pretty well. And the past 3 days, it's tier 1. What the fuck? What? It's tier 1? And it's also the version with the Queen? It does have, okay, all right. These are popular cards, so they're not core. Dude, what is even going on here? Guys, what is this? What even is going on here? I was gonna argue that this deck wasn't as good, but suddenly the data is telling me this is a tier 1 deck. I don't know. Maybe you guys can play some Charge Warrior and figure this out for me. Cause, like, when I was playing the deck, I actually, okay, what was my record with the deck? It wasn't the greatest. I ended up going below 50%. But that's only because I ended up misplaying. So yeah, I ended up going 3-4 with this deck. And I know for a fact that 2 of my losses were 100% throws. So I could have gone 5-2. And the decks that I saw were Druid, Priest, Hunter, Warrior, 2 Rogues, and a Shaman. Shaman pretty much was the only deck that I really didn't have that much of a chance against. And I did get scammed by a Rogue once. But dude, like, what more can I say about Charge Warrior? Like, apparently this deck is doing well on the stats. And honestly, I can give it a little bit of a thumbs up, because when I was playing it, it didn't feel terrible to play against. It's just, you know, you have scam decks that you have to worry about, obviously. But aside from scam decks, you are the scam deck with this deck, and as long as you don't get Theatard, I guess you really don't care all too much. But again, if you do get Theatard, you have so many combo pieces to where I don't think it should matter all too much, right? I don't know. I feel like I'm rambling about this deck enough, so I'll go ahead and just end it saying that this deck might have a chance. I would not recommend using all of your dust crafting this deck if you are a control warrior aficionado and you don't have that much dust left. So play this deck if you like Control Warrior or if you like Charge Warrior, but if you're thinking this is going to be the meta breaker to where you need to invest your dust into, don't do that. I don't want you to lose your dust on a deck that eventually may get phased out of the ladder, but right now, it's doing good. It's doing pretty good, man. And the last thing that I want to go over are the nerfs. Do these decks actually have a chance of being playable again? I think that Miracle Rogue and Ramp Druid both have ways of being played, and Mage is also doing pretty well right now, but I think that, like, this deck right here is no longer going to be a thing. We're just going to go back to the original Miracle Rogue. If I have it made, here it is. We're just probably going to go back to this version of the deck because 0 Mana Nulls do a good job at being able to shut out the tempo-based decks that will be given some time in the spotlight now that they aren't just getting killed by turn 4. But I think that this deck is still going to see some play. I've already seen a bunch of players trying to, you know, bring this deck back or, you know, establish that it's still good. And it is still good. The only thing that changed was Edwin high rolls not happening as soon. So that one extra turn gives decks like Hunter and other aggressive decks ways of being able to beat Rogue like they should be able to. But if you're looking for Miracle Rogue, this is just the deck to play. I think that this deck is absolutely fine. However, when it comes to Ramp Druid is looking weird. Yeah, because this is Aggro Druid, Clark. Let's find the actual Ramp Druid deck. But Ramp Druid is looking like it's in a very weird position. This is the same deck that I was playing before the nerf, so I haven't made any changes. But the change to Guff did make a difference. However, it's probably not making as much of a difference as people would have hoped. But this card being nerfed to empty mana crystals really did go a long way. So it's gotten to the point where Druid is definitely phasing out of ladder a little bit, but there are still some players that are doing very well with this because let's be honest, Sire Nathria works perfect in Druid, and as long as you have the mana to support it, this card is just absolutely busted if it doesn't get taken by the Theatar. So I think that, you know, this deck could still be good if you spend a bunch of dust going into Ramp Druid, and there's no way that you can get your dust back for like Topior or like the other legendaries in this deck, like Sire Nathria, and Renathal was given to people for free, so you don't have to worry about that. But this deck is still good if you're wanting to try it. I don't think it's top tier by any means. I don't think it's top 5 decks anymore, but it really just depends on how the meta shapes around it, because obviously if aggressive decks like Hunter become the go-to, this deck is going to have some struggles. But until we figure out what the meta actually settles into, after we see like maybe some experimentation get rewarded, and maybe we have a new meta breaker that suddenly appears on the top of the tier list, I think that Druid still has a chance at being a pretty good tier 2 deck at the very worst. And also, the very worst, I guess, is just a tournament deck now, but Ramp Druid is still very good, to say the least. Last, and debatably least, how good is Mage actually in this meta? Because I feel like one thing that's kind of preventing Mage from being good is the fact that a lot of people just really don't want to be playing Mage right now. And it's kind of funny because I was playing this version of like an aggro Mage before the nerfs went live, and now I'm not sure if this is going to be the way to make this deck, because it was all about being able to get the Dawngrasp value. And this deck can still do pretty well at like pressuring our opponent, being like the closest version we have to like a tempo Mage. And I was gonna make a video about this deck because Fury was able to reach rank 1 legend with this deck, I think 2 or 3 days before the patch ended up being announced and eventually implemented. So I didn't have time in order to really get some clips with this deck. But how good is straight up just like Skeleton Mage, the one that we're used to already? And I think this deck is still good. I feel like 40 card is going to be the way to play this deck, and we might have to play cards like Blizzard, Deathborn, and as well as cards like Rune. This deck is really weird because you have Deepwater Evoker that could obviously low roll and hit cards like Flurry and Wildfire. And maybe the way to play this deck is just to get rid of some of the big spells and just focus on the aspect of dealing damage with the hero power. But now that Dawngrasp is nerfed, it doesn't really seem too smart to go for anymore. So the idea of being able to combine the scam potential with this deck kind of makes sense. I don't think we need to go so far to put in a Drakefire Amulet because we're not big spell mage. We don't have Belinda or anything like that. But like this deck can still perform very well. Nightcloak Sanctum nerf was very well warranted. I don't think it really limits how good this deck can be, but it kind of sucks that, you know, you don't have all of this freeze that is available to you now. But again, rightfully so. This was a little bit too powerful. I'm glad that they took it down a peg. But this is why we run cards like Blizzard. This is why we run cards like the Dawngrasp. We have plenty of ways of being able to freeze, even though this card did get nerfed. We still have Amplified Snow Flurry, and we also have Flurries. We still have plenty of ways of being able to freeze our opponent if need be, and we still have plenty of ways of being able to summon skeletons and get the value out of our Kel'Thuzad. Unfortunately, this deck had to get rid of the Kael'thas, so there's not really any way of being able to, like, brand Kael'thas or brand Mordresh, for example, without having to stick the brand on the field, which, if you ever stick this card, it's going to get cleared. That's just how that works. But in any case, I think that this deck does have potential. I'm not 100% sold on the Sire Nathria, but maybe you just need another win con since you lost a decent amount of burst. I don't know. I think that this deck has potential. Mage is still a very frustrating deck to play against, especially when a card like Solid Alibi comes out. And I as much as I kind of dismissed Varden earlier, this card is still good. Like, let's be honest, man. Like, being able to have the potential of dealing 8 damage on a hero power every single turn in a metagame where you can literally take 1 damage at a time, that is going to be good depending on what decks you go up against and how quickly they can actually beat you. And with the 40 HP and with being able to gain more life and to have ways of being able to stall and freeze, it feels like Mage is still going to be not necessarily a top contender, but it's still going to be a deck you're going to see on your ladder climb. And I just couldn't ignore how good this deck still feels to play. Like, yeah, we lost the major payoff, but this deck can still build itself up. It's just not as fast as it used to be, and that's not, you know, that's not the deck being bad by any means. This is just the deck being balanced, I guess, because it used to be so freaking busted with the additional hero powers that were possible. But now this deck is actually taken down a peg. It can still do the OP things that it was able to do before it got nerfed, because you still have ways of turbocharging the hero power with Reckless. And a friend of mine were debating if the 1 HP threshold was actually easier for Reckless Apprentice to get the value multiple times. But I feel like with how your opponent plays minions and how this card works and targeting the first minion that was played, it's not only easy for your opponent to play around it, it's very hard for you to play into it. So maybe that argument doesn't have as much luster as I would have hoped. But I mean, this deck is still good. If you're wanting somebody to tell you to keep playing Mage, I'm going to go ahead and tell you to keep playing Mage if it's the deck that you really like. But I mean, it's just about what the meta evolves around Mage. Hunter was one of those decks that wasn't even able to really beat Mage, but now it kind of has a little bit of an edge since you just don't have like that big damage output anymore. And I guess it's also one of those things where if you have 40 HP, it kind of is easier to beat Hunter, but Big Hunter, for example, is going to be a deck that I feel like is very difficult for you to beat unless you have a lot of freezing. Maybe I'm just talking out loud. Maybe I'm just speculating. But I still do believe that Mage is a good deck to play if you're wanting to play one of the nerf decks. But there you guys have it. Those are what I believe to be the most powerful decks that are available in the Castle Nathria post-patch meta. I still think that things are going to, you know, settle over the next week or so. So I'll be sure to make another video highlighting what I believe the best decks are. But right now, I feel like people are kind of playing it safe. They know that Demon Hunter is good, and they know the nerf decks are quote-unquote bad. So what's going on right now is a lot of people are just playing the decks that really weren't touched, like Boar Priest, like Relic Demon Hunter, like XL Beast Hunter. Those are all decks that make sense for people to be playing because they are decks that have not been impacted by the nerfs and only are going to increase in power level because their main matchups did get nerfed. So once the dust kind of settles and we know what is going to be popular and what decks are going to be best to counter, we're going to have this kind of counter metagame to where maybe, I don't know, like a freaking warrior deck that isn't charge warrior can maybe come up, can come and rise to beat like these hunters that we're going to be seeing. I'm just speculating. I don't think that's actually going to happen. But once the meta settles, we'll be able to see how good these changes actually were. Because right now, they're making a difference in a very small way, which is, I believe, the intended purpose of these nerfs was not to destroy these decks, but at least to take them down a peg. And as always, if you enjoy this content, feel free to like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel to be notified about any other future updates that we have coming. Because I've got a lot of video ideas that I'm working on right now. It's just a matter of being able to hammer them out in one day or so. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. Hopefully these decks will be able to get you to whatever rank that you're looking to get to, and we'll see you for the next video.